You know that I was a good boy and didn't buy the other watch I was looking at there, which was a 1979 day date, blue dial, Spanish day wheel, bark bracelet, just absolutely
There's
gorgeous.
still time. Our flight doesn't leave till noon.
Yeah, I'm
maybe
here,
maybe you could eke that out. Coming to you direct from Geneva, this is Open Work, a look inside the watch industry. I'm Gabe Riley, co-founder of Collective.
And I'm Asher Apkin, co-founder of Collective. Collective Horology is an independent retailer based in Southern California. We carry a wide range of brands, including the GPHG nominees, Garrick, Armin Strom, and Czapek. To see our available inventory, visit us online at collectivehorology.com.
Yeah, that was kind of the intro.
I mean, I didn't have it in front of me, so I did my best.
Like we said, we're in Geneva. We're here for a few reasons. We went last night to the GPHG award ceremony. We'll talk all about the kind of the behind the scenes and the scuttlebutt at the GPHG show itself. But we were also here for another event, and we couldn't say no to both of these events combined. And that was Czapek's 10th anniversary party, celebrating 10 years of the reborn brand and 180 years actually since the brand was initially founded by Francois Czapek in 1845. So we'll talk a little bit about the Czapek thing, because from a business standpoint, I think it's pretty remarkable how far Czapek has come in those 10 years. We'll talk a little bit about our time in Geneva, because usually when we're here, it's meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And we had some time on this trip, because it's not Geneva Watch Days or Watches and Wonders, to do some watch stuff. So we can have a Talk Watches segment. And then, of course, like I said, we'll chat about the GPHG itself. So Asher, 10 years of Czapek. And we were chatting at breakfast before recording this, that it's really remarkable what the folks there have managed to do. Just forget the watches for a second, but purely from a business standpoint in 10 years.
Yeah. One of the things that I've learned as a first-time entrepreneur, and I suspect if anyone listening to this has owned their own business or been around those who have, time works differently inside the black hole of the business than it does outside the business. And often, something that feels like it took us eons to accomplish, from the outside in, looks like we did it on a Saturday. And I think that's very much the truth about Czapek. Looking outside in, this is a company with, 15, 20 employees, more watchmakers, millions of dollars of industrial equipment, combined, hundreds of years of experience in finishing and movement manufacture and design, et cetera, all the combined experience of everybody that's working there. And when we first met them, when we first reached out to them, our relationship with them began in 2020, when we started working on the Lanikai collaboration that we did with them that ended up releasing in 2023. That was a 3-year-long project. But I have very vivid memories of our first conversation with Xavier de Roquemorel, the CEO, and he, talking to him at like 9 o'clock his time, in what looked like
9 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah, exactly. In the evening, in the background, looked very much like a, some sort of like industrial garage that he was in. It was a startup. And now, not only do they have a full-fledged manufacturer, a boutique here in Geneva, proper offices, a staff, et cetera. It's incredible. Not just from where the watchmaking has come. We can talk about that and some of the implications of their releases, but also just on a personal level, just my admiration for the business that Xavier and Patrick Czapek, the COO, and the rest of the team have built is remarkable, as well as a shout out to Mr. Mike Margolis, the U.S. president of Czapek, both a friend and somebody who we just greatly admire in the business, who has built many businesses here in the U.S., including H. Moser and Singer. So it's pretty incredible to get to see that from the outside in.
Yeah, for me, there are two things that really stand out about Czapek. One is, yes, the grit and the determination and all of that it takes to run a business, and coming as far as they have in 10 years, that they're going from startup to mainstay. But I think there's two things that they've managed to do really well, and most brands can't manage. Number one, we had Xavier on the podcast months ago to talk about the founding of Czapek and the business structure of Czapek. And for those who don't know, and even those who are a little bit familiar, Czapek is a really interesting business model. It's essentially a shareholder-owned business, and they funded the business with investments primarily from watch collectors. And I'm not exactly sure how many shareholders there are exactly, but based on the number of folks I've met, I would say it's dozens, and that's pretty remarkable. Most watch brands are started by an individual or a small group of investors. And this is a brand that was started not only by a relatively large number of investors, but people who are fans of watches and watch collectors. And that's a very difficult way to fund a business because you have a lot of stakeholders, a lot of personalities, and a lot of opinions to manage. And so to be able 10 years in to persist with that model and to manage that successfully, I think is rather remarkable. One of the challenges a lot of people face when they move into the watch industry from being a collector or an enthusiast is they realize very quickly, and we had this, and we've had our own rude awakenings. Like, this is a business and an industry, and it's one thing to approach it as a hobby, as an enthusiast, and for fun. It's quite another thing to get into the arena, and it's tough, and it's a very difficult thing to manage. So they pulled that rabbit out of the hat. I think it's a very challenging business model, but they've managed to hold it together and to make it a success and a strength of the business. The other thing is product portfolio management. Obviously there was a Czapek for 5 years, half of the brand's life, before there ever was an Antarctique. But the Antarctique is really the watch that put the brand on the sort of the stage and really in the eye of the watch collecting community more broadly. And that's a challenging thing when you have a product hit of that magnitude. And I think in the years since, the extreme hype of the Antarctique, they've managed to grow their product portfolio and grow their business extremely thoughtfully, and that's very difficult to manage. We've talked to Rob Nuds about how many have-a-day heroes, as he likes to say, are out there. And when you have a hit product, it's very easy to fall in, to have that become a trap for your brand. And they've managed to not just expand their product portfolio, but really move their business up market. I mean, this is a brand that has consistently moved up in price point. So the Kay de Berg, which is their first watch, was probably at the time it launched just under $20,000.
Oh, no way less than that.
15 or
less
so?
Less than that.
Okay, well, yeah. I'm trying to account for inflation and all that stuff.
Sure,
here.
But I mean, the actual sticker price was, I think, like $13,000
okay,
US
yeah.
or something like that.
And,
which, as Zav pointed out, was barely, if at all, profitable.
And if you look at the portfolio now, and just speaking from our own experience in terms of what we sell from Czapek, I mean, the core of the business is really in the horology pieces at probably $40,000 and up. And that is a remarkable feat as well. So this is a brand that has pulled several rabbits out of the hat already. And we got to look at the third, which is this new watch, the Time Jumper, and the Caliber 10, which powers it.
Yeah, I mean, so everyone can read about this watch and what makes it special, on the blogs, et cetera. But I think from a business standpoint, what's remarkable about it is the evolution from working with movement partners when the brand launched to where they are right now with the Caliber 10, which is designed completely in-house. It's 75% manufactured in-house.
By weight. No, not by weight. It's 75% of the components.
That's classic. But
75% by thought. We intended to make 75. They actually make 75% of it in-house.
But it's also a movement that is essentially setting them up for the next decade plus of the business because it's highly convertible. It's designed to be able to house integrated, not component-driven complications moving forward. Module-driven complications moving forward. And that's going to allow a whole new range of opportunity for the brand while not creating 14, 15, 16 millimeter thick watches that are module based. So, for example, we love IWC, but their perpetual calendar is a big boy. It's 15, 16 millimeters tall because it is driven by a module on a base caliber. That won't happen with Czapek, and the proof is in the pudding with the very, very first watch that they released based off the Caliber 10, which is the Time Jumper, a 24-hour jump hour, which is in an absolutely gorgeous Hunter case. And it's always cool when you see a watch that's aesthetically impressive, but I think this is a major milestone for the brand because not only do we have the technical achievement of the Caliber 10, we also have a huge aesthetic step forward. As Gabe mentioned, a lot of brands get consumed by their most popular product. AP is the perfect example of this. They stand at a Xerox machine and pump out, this year's next iconic watch. It is what it is. you love AP, great. And if you don't love AP, there's, it's the Royal Oak Company. I think Czapek is very keenly self-aware and has said the first, major success of our first decade was commercial success, was the Antarctique. The future, maybe that is, maybe it isn't, but we've given ourselves the roadmap and the technical leeway to be able to give ourselves a lot of runway. And I think that is incredibly inspiring. So, and then, the other side of it was parties are great, but parties are really fun when you're there with a bunch of people who are fun to talk to and interesting and happy. And I think the last point I'll just make is it was a room full, and it was a full room.
It was beyond full. It was packed
of happy people.
Yeah.
And it was everyone from, collectors to shareholders to staff to general friends of the brand. There were folks that we know from other brands that were there, which I thought was really cool, by the way.
Yes.
Like we saw folks there from Speak Marine, of which there is no business relationship. They're just friends. And I think, I don't know, one of the main takeaways that I had from this whole week, and we'll get there when we talk about the GPHG, is in many ways, this is the smallest industry I've ever been a part of. And I mean that in the sense that you see a lot of the same people when you go to different events.
It's very close-knit.
But a lot of those people are really good friends, regardless of whether they work for competitors or, are out there competing for the hearts and minds of collectors. They're friends. And I just find that so inspiring. And it's a good reminder, especially coming from the kind of industry that I used to come from, which was very cutthroat, that a lot of people, and don't get me wrong, I mean, it's a competitive industry, but, when push comes to shove, people want to see people succeed. And I found that really, really, really nice.
Yeah, it was cool. In addition to the party, which was a really fun party, because a lot of times you go to these things and it's all about, creating a brand image and being fancy and champagne and all this stuff.
There was champagne.
There was some champagne there. But it was just a fun time. There was nothing, haughty or pompous or anything about it. And the vibe in the room was just super happy and welcoming and friendly. And so that is great to see. You don't always experience that stuff at these sorts of events, but that's par for the course of Czapek. Now, in addition to that party, they also had a screening of a documentary on the brand, and that's going to be available on YouTube. So I believe Czapek will be publishing this documentary, which is basically a look back on the first 10 years and 180 years of the brand overall, and looking forward and sort of telling the story of the modern brand of Czapek. Really well done piece, and certainly worth checking out if you want to learn more about Czapek. If you're a huge fan of the brand and want that look and access, very cool as well. So keep an eye out for that. So that was Czapek. That was kind of one of the first things we did was head to that party. But unlike other times we're in Geneva where it's just meeting after meeting after meeting, you and I had a little more time. I mean, this is something of a lull. It's interesting to come to Geneva at a time when it isn't just packed and overrun just by watch people. Now, there are a lot of people from the watch community here, whether it was for auctions or GPHG, but it is nowhere near on the scale of Geneva Watch Days or Watches and Wonders, which meant you and I had some time to enjoy in Geneva and do some watch stuff. And Asher, you did some shopping, didn't you?
Yeah, I went to the Davidoff brothers, who, for those who are not familiar, are a mainstay, Roy and Sasha, mainstay of the vintage watch community and certainly of vintage watch shopping in Geneva. They have a really cute small store. I'm stopping myself because I don't even know if it's less a store and more kind of this like horological treasure trove, kind of a nook across the street from the Mad Gallery in the Old Town in Geneva. So, you walk up the street and it's the Mad Gallery, the Davidoffs, and you end up in this beautiful square where Urwerk is. And I went because, we spend all this time every day. We think about the brands we want to support and selling watches and working with clients. But, Gabe, I actually like watches too. And
oh, I don't at all.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming clean.
I'm just here for the plunder.
Wrong business. But I saw something at the Davidoffs that I wanted, so I reached out. My grandfather used to wear, on my mother's side, a little Vacheron hand-wound ultra-thin watch from the 1960s. It's engraved on the back from my grandmother to my grandfather, and it was the watch that I wore on my wedding, which Gabe officiated. And it's a dainty little watch. It's in dire need of a service. I probably could service it. I'm a little scared to do it because of how important it is to me. But that little 31.5 millimeter Vacheron is something that is very important to me. And I saw that the Davidoffs had a 1990 31.5 millimeter hand wound patrimony, Vacheron patrimony. And it was, I showed it to Gabe in the airport, and I was like, I have to buy this. And
this was premeditated.
It was very premeditated. And I texted Roy, who I've met tangentially here and there, and he was kind enough to let me drop into the boutique. And, the boutique is like a little bit of a scene. I showed up in there, and like I said, it's not really a boutique. I went in, I said to Roy, this is what I'm looking for. And he kind of just went to the back, and out came a bunch of watches. He's like, you should look at this, and you should look at this, you should look at this.
Ooh, what else came out?
Oh, a platinum patrimony that was with a reserve de marche patrimony with a date complication, Corne de Vache lugs. Ooh, gorgeous. That I was a good boy and didn't buy the other watch I was looking at there, which was a 1979 day date, blue dial, Spanish day wheel, bark bracelet, just absolutely
There's
gorgeous.
Still time. Our flight doesn't leave till noon.
Yeah, I'm
maybe
out here,
maybe you can eke that out.
But
yeah, no, that watch is beautiful.
But the point was, I went in there. When I was in there, Tony Trena dropped in. Always good to see him. This lovely lady dropped in for a coffee date with Roy. It felt very communal. And so I got to buy a watch, which not a thing I normally get to do, but pretty awesome because I got to wear that to the GPHG, which I was also double wristing because
Czapek, I
Czapek,
was going to say sort of
because Czapek was kind enough to lend me a time jumper for the event. So I was double wristing a Vacheron and a time jumper, which is got to be one of the coolest set of watches I could have ever had. But point being, it was a pretty fantastic experience just on my end, to do that. And the fun thing about buying from Roy, and I think this is a good example for all of us too, just about what it is to buy and to sell, is like, there is no pretense. He knew everything about the watch. He told it to me, and it was, here it is. It's great. You interested? You want it or not? It wasn't and I don't mean that in like a rough and gruff way. It was just very direct. And I thought that was really cool, especially considering, Gabe and I spend all of our time thinking about what it is to sell a watch. And we spend so little time being sold to. So it's really nice when you go into a space and, and I guess maybe it's because I feel like Roy is kind of on my wavelength in terms of how I want to be sold to.
Yeah.
So that felt really good to me. And I'm just really glad that I had the opportunity to do that. I've wanted to go in there. Gabe can attest to this. We've walked by that place a million times on our way to meetings.
It's legendary too.
And so
that's like a bucket list kind of thing.
Yeah. The problem is now that I have Roy's phone number, next time I'm out here is going to be even more dangerous. But
yeah. Some cool stuff. I mean, I hate to say the word, but curated. It really is like a very curated and cool collection of vintage watches he has. Speaking of the experience of being sold to, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Which is, I believe, technically, the Davidoffs are open by appointment only. You got to make an appointment.
They are.
And that's kind of how our boutique works as well, by appointment. I know why we do that. I have a guess as to why he operates that way. And look, the core of our business is online and over the phone. That's primarily the reason we do it. But what do you think about having, you're in Geneva, you want to go watch shopping, but you have to make an appointment to do it. What do you think about that as kind of like the customer experience of making the appointment and that approach to retail? What's that like as a customer? What are the trade-offs?
I'll sum it up really quickly. That boutique was open, my watch would have cost more. And I think, the fact that it's not staffed by somebody 24/7.
Oh, interesting.
And that I'm dealing with the actual guy who did the buying, who knows the watch. There's that. The other thing is, it shows intention, If you're going to make an appointment, it doesn't mean you have to buy something, of course, but it shows intention. It's you have something in mind. You want to see something. So there's that. And that said, it's not that much of a roadblock. I texted him and he replied to me 10 minutes later, and I had an appointment. It wasn't that big a deal. And I suspect if you were walking down the street and you saw him in there and he wasn't with a client, you rung the doorbell. It's not like he'd shoo you away.
Sure, but you can't count on him to be open exactly from this hour to that. And you're right. I had never even I thought about it more from the perspective of intention. Hey, look, if we're going to take some time to show you some stuff, let's make sure everyone here is serious about it. But you're absolutely right. for so many businesses, the boutique becomes this albatross. The tail begins to wag the dog, and everything becomes in service of keeping the overhead of the boutique going, because there's staff, there's security, there's the build out. When you build a space that's really open to the public and staff it in that way, it can likely become, if not your largest, your second largest cost center as a business outside of the inventory.
Well, it also demands a specific design to the space, which is to say there are no display cases and things like that. Roy literally went to the back and then brought watches out.
It's a darling little shop.
But if it was open,
and it wouldn't have that vibe if it was a showroom.
It wouldn't be possible because you'd need to have display cases and all sorts of things like that.
Couldn't. The other thing is, like, I would suspect, I'm not a huge vintage watch buyer, but a big part of vintage watch buying and shopping is understanding the story of the piece, the significance of it. I would imagine there's more education required, because it's not like there's a ton of information out there online right now about a 1990s Vacheron Patrimony watch. And so you get a much more individualized and personal experience, because you're not worrying about the next person who's walking through the door to get their battery changed.
Yeah. I mean, there's that. And then, of course, you're also getting the information directly from the vintage watch expert, And I think, and also, one thing that I think is great about that experience too is when he showed me a watch, he was like, hey, I need to tell you something. There's a defect here. Be aware of that, et cetera. And it's a demonstration of not only somebody who's been selling vintage for a long time, but also someone who does so with integrity. And again, that's more of a consultative sell, so to speak, than it is like, an "oh, but sir, would you like to treat yourself today?" kind of, quote unquote luxury experience, which was night and day from when we went to the Rolex boutique, for example.
Yeah.
Where they were, to be clear, perfectly polite. But I mean, it literally was, we walked in and.
Well, no, we didn't walk in. We had to wait in line to get into the Rolex boutique.
Yeah, but I don't think that was presumptuous. I mean, I think there were a number of people that were there, et cetera.
There's a certain number of staff. Yeah. They wanted to make sure everyone who walked in had a staff member signed to them.
Yeah.
But it's open to the public, all that sort of stuff. And it's a different experience where you're literally waiting in a queue, shuffled into the store directly to the salesperson. Yeah. And sort of, you inquired about a watch, which is a rather esoteric watch, it's not like you went in there.
It was that weird. I mean, it was like it was an OP.
Yeah, it was an OP, but you didn't go in asking for like a Submariner or a Daytona or something like that. You asked for something that's, kind of toward the back of the catalog. And it was just simply like, oh, we don't have that. That's not available.
Yeah, which of course is hilarious, because like they most certainly do. Like the for display only watches are absolutely saleable inventory down the road, but for all sorts of rules and reasons, et cetera, that doesn't happen. And I sort of feel, ironically, like I wasn't frustrated by that. I just felt bad for the salesperson, because if you think about it, like most Rolex salespeople would really like to sell you anything that you'd like to buy, like
that's true. The gatekeeping cuts both ways.
Yeah.
If you're a salesperson, you want to sell.
Yeah. That's how you make a living.
Yeah.
And it's got to be really just brutal that your entire day is no. Can I interest you in this $65,000 precious metal watch when you walked in here asking for something 1/10 the price?
Yeah.
And I think that's got to be really, I don't want to say soul crushing, but like on a day after day basis, it's got to be rough. And the thing about it is, you look at that store. This was the main boutique, also kind of near the old town.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's multi-million-dollar build out, the whole thing.
It was a wham bam, thank you, ma'am kind of experience, which I think stands in stark contrast to the Patek Salon, where we also went.
Sure. And the Patek Salon is interesting.
There's really nothing available to sell there either,
Exactly.
But the way they manage it is entirely different and way more personal.
Yes, but I would argue that it also is a reflection of the energy you bring into that space. Like, for example, I guarantee you there are people who walk in there every 10 minutes asking for a Cubitus or a Nautilus or an Aquanaut or whatever.
We went in there asking to see the Cubitus.
Well, you went in there asking to see the Cubitus.
Because I've never seen one in the metal, and I was curious to check it out, because, of course, everyone who's handled one tells you, oh, well, you need to see it in the metal to fully appreciate it and have an opinion. So I wanted to see one in the metal to fully appreciate it.
Much in the same way that you must look at Roblox to appreciate that.
And I can tell you, I've seen it in the metal, and my opinion is unchanged.
Yeah.
However, the experience at that salon was lovely.
It is. If you are attracted to that kind of a luxury experience, or if you're in the industry and you're thinking about that kind of luxury experience, I would argue that they are the absolute benchmark for it, because it exudes class, not because they are being pretentious, but because they simply are comfortable with being on top of the industry, and they have nothing to prove and everything to share. And I think that's the coolest part, because you go in there, there is no one in there is going to convince you about like the heritage of Patek Philippe. They're not there to like, pour you a glass of champagne and encourage you to go look at a 24, Far from it. They sit down and say, what would you like to see? And you can request to see anything.
Absolutely anything.
And that is where that is why, to me, as somebody who loves watches, it's incredible, because I don't care about the Cubitus. The Nautilus is a great watch. I've owned one. It's awesome, but like, it's not, I don't view that in the way that I think other collectors do, but I do have incredible admiration for the haute horology pieces from Patek. And these are watches that you rarely get to see ever, let alone handle and play with. And, it's wonderful when they sit down, they go, you look at a watch. I was looking at the Inline Perpetual, for example, which is an astonishingly beautiful watch. And then they just sort of offhandedly say, hey, have you ever heard of Patek Minute Repeater? And it's not like, oh, sir, have you ever considered the glorious chimes echoing through the mountaintops?
Like, it'd be cool for you to check out if you have
a minute repeater.
Yeah.
And it's presented in this way of like, you clearly love this. You want to see something cool. And but done in a way that was very elegant and very just respectful. And it was very clear that even though they're not going to sell you anything.
No, and they say like, we don't have this watch or this here available for you, but we'd love to share it with you. And if it's something you're interested in, you'd need to speak with your dealer. Yeah. And it's handled in a way that's straightforward, and you're not being gaslit by being told, oh, but no, there's nothing here, sir. But if you'd like a gold watch, we can sell you one.
Yeah, no, none of that. Which
was literally what we were told at Rolex. Oh no, we don't have that. But if you'd like a gold watch, we can sell you one. Come on, that's so lame.
Yeah, it's not my favorite, but and I mean, look, I'm not a Patek collector. Like it's not what I aspire to. But every time I'm in Geneva, I always want to go in there because it's so wonderful. So that's we don't even need to go here, but that's separate and apart from the Patek Museum, which is an absolute must for anyone in Geneva at any time to go to, because it's not just about Patek. It is a museum of horology, and it is magnificent, and it is an incredible experience and a gift from the Patek Philippe company to watch collectors everywhere to be able to go there. So that was an absolute blast.
So we had a few different retail experiences, the appointment only personal thing, you had the Rolex thing, the Patek approach, different ways of approaching retail and the customer experience, all with their own advantages or trade-offs. Other than that, we went to a few other stores, and it was pretty sleepy. In fact, I might even say, like, in the other retailers we went to, it was relatively dead. We went to a few multi-brand retailers, and of course the Rolex corner of those retailers is being, fawned over, but otherwise the rest of the store was dead. We went to a couple mono-brand boutiques, empty, and we even heard quite transparently from some of the sales folks we spoke with at those stores that business is pretty slow. And I don't know if that's a Geneva thing, a time of year thing, a global watch thing, but certainly compared to the energy we've experienced in these stores at other times of the year, which are probably more overrun with watch collectors, it was quite sleepy. So, outside of Patek and Rolex, I think as we all know, and maybe AP and Richard Mille as well, the rest of the industry is facing headwinds. And that was certainly reflected, I think, in what we saw. Keep in mind, Geneva probably has, maybe except for Hong Kong, more watch retail space per capita square foot than probably anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, maybe Singapore.
You trip over a watch store or several on every block in the commercial districts, and there just wasn't much activity going on.
Yeah. But that said, and in fact, there were a few points where Gabe and I just came clean in a store. Someone's like, "Would you like to try this on?" And we were like, "No, we're also retailers. Like, I don't want to lead you down the primrose path, And that was when we would get feedback from some of our peers out here who would say, yeah, I mean, like, here's an incredible watch. And, I'm surprised it's still here. It should have sold. And in some cases, we would see references like that where we were like, how is that possible that that's in the case?
Oh, there were some, hype watches that you would assume were gone that had launched over a year or several years ago that are still sitting in the vitrines gathering dust. It was remarkable.
Yeah. And I think it also speaks to a really difficult reality of selling things like this, which is to say, obviously it's, you want to make sure that when you're selling a watch, you're selling it to somebody who's going to love it to a degree. But if you gatekeep too much, then you end up in a scenario where you took the air out of your own balloon, and here we are. So there's a lot of reasons why this is. That's probably a whole episode unto itself. But it was something that we noticed it was worthwhile talking about.
But what wasn't dead was the GPHG.
Oh my God.
So this is like, speaking of bucket list things, the Davidoff shop, and the GPHG. We did an episode last year, kind of looking behind the scenes at what it's like to be an Academy member, how the voting process and nominations and all that stuff works. So we don't need to talk about that. We don't even really need to talk about the watches themselves. That's been covered, and of course, there's a ton of coverage on the nominees and the winners and all that good stuff. But the experience of attending the GPHG is not only something we've wanted to do since becoming members of the GPHG, but it's just a watch enthusiast bucket list item, period.
Oh, this is a thing I've wanted to do forever. I mean,
how cool.
Being in California, I should live stream the GPHG every year, but I'm usually doing it while I'm like making morning coffee and like making breakfast and lunch for my kids before school. And, it's like kind of a solitary thing, and it's fun and exciting, kind of, like watching the auctions. But being there was a whole other scenario. And this year, the space that they normally use is being renovated. So they moved to this absolutely gorgeous old event space that's on an island right in the middle. It sounds more grand than it is, but it's basically on like a tiny little island in the middle of the lake.
Well, it's technically where the Rhone River starts. The lake ends and the Rhone begins.
There you go.
The waters are rushing past you as the watches are projected on stage.
Indeed. And it was glorious. You walk in and they it's clear how proud the Canton of Geneva is of this. They're obviously a huge sponsor and promoter of the GPHG. They had Swiss Guard. It was a Swiss Guard, essentially?
Yeah.
There, which was awesome.
I got a photo with the Swiss Guard.
Yeah, we'll see our Instagram for that. And, it was a smaller space this year, which was also exciting.
Beautiful venue.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely incredible and beautiful space and incredibly well produced.
And, it was interesting. I don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak, other than, brands that we support that I was excited to see. But obviously there are other makers that I'm a huge fan of. Like if you guys remember from our episode at Watches and Wonders that we talked about the Easter egg tourbillon from Anton Sukhov, and that was a clock I was really excited about. And I found that when we got to that category, I got a little adrenaline hit from it because I wanted to see him win, or Fiona Kruger's incredible clock, which I wanted to see win.
He didn't win the clock category.
He didn't win that.
Yeah.
But then, there was a surprise award for him, which he greatly deserved, the Horological Revelation, I believe. Yeah. And, it really made me happy, much in the same way that Famal Hout did not win the Tourbillon Award, but came around as well to get the recognition that the young brand deserves. And one thing that really struck me, my French is rudimentary, but getting better. And it is, and as anyone who's ever learned a language will know, understanding comes well before your ability to speak. So I was able to pick up here and there some things that folks were saying in their speeches.
It's worth pointing out, unlike most events in the watch industry, and I think it's because the as you said, the Canton and City of Geneva are very involved in the GPHG. It's the Grand Prix de Haute Horologie de Genève of Geneva. It's very much this is a matter of, it's not only partially organized by the Canton, but this is very much a matter of civic and local pride.
Absolutely.
And most of the default language here, unlike, that's something like a Watches and Wonders or in most business meetings in Europe or around the world, the default language here is French. And so if you don't speak French, and look, this is a good, and I think
there was live translation, which I didn't realize.
Oh, there was
after the fact.
Live translation, but the default language is French. Fortunately, Asher and I know enough high school French to be able to kind of get by and at least have a sense of what's being discussed. And then if you don't speak French, and they made a joke, if you're from the German speaking part of Switzerland, then you speak in English, or certainly if you're not from a French speaking country at all, you speak in English. So there were presenters and of course award winners who spoke in English. But this is culturally, it's a very Swiss thing, which I thought was cool because a lot of times you come here and you want to experience the cradle of watchmaking and everything's in English, and it can feel very, very sanitized. And this had some kind of authenticity to it because of the French.
That's what I was getting at. There was an earnestness to it. And the one that really stuck out to me was the gentleman who is now the head of watchmaking at LVMH, who collected the award for Bulgari's ultra-thin tourbillon, which most assuredly...
What a category that was.
Oh, yeah.
That might have been one of the toughest categories.
Incredibly competitive. Yeah. But the thing that really struck me was his speech was incredibly earnest. And he basically said something to the effect of, I've been in this industry for 25 years. I probably don't have another 25 years. And when I started here, these brands like Bulgari were just not getting any of the respect that they deserved. And for decades, we have worked to get to this achievement. And you could see what it meant to him. Sure, this is a professional achievement. Yes, it's important, blah, blah, blah. But for him as an individual, there was an earnestness there and a true appreciation that was, honestly, it was beautiful. And it really struck me, and I was very moved by it. But there was one really awkward gaffe.
Oh, there were several gaffes. So look, we're going to talk about the gaffes here, which I think are unfortunately, but realistically, probably the thing that most people who attended the GPHG are going to be talking about versus the award winners themselves, which is kind of a shame. But suffice it to say, before we talk about the gaffes here, and I'm saying this not only because we were invited guests and, we don't take that for granted. This was an incredibly well-produced
my God. It was astonishingly beautiful.
The production value is incredible. The execution is incredible, particularly when you take into account that this was their first year operating in this, what may be just a temporary space. I mean, I was blown away by the production value. However, that doesn't mean there weren't some gaffes, and there were a number of gaffes.
I mean, I look at this, as somebody who used to work in live production, and it like triggers my anxiety because
you had unique insight into what the breakdown really was.
Yeah. And I feel bad because I've made mistakes on stage. That is for sure. And I get it. And like the trick with making a mistake on stage is you just kind of got to roll with it. As one of my favorite bass players, Victor Wooten, says, when you play a wrong note, play it twice. And there's a lot of truth to that, but sometimes you can't unring the bell. And that happened when the Aiguille d'Or. So it
happened before the Aiguille d'Or.
It happened a couple times.
So there were a number of instances in the show earlier where the presenters who aren't watch industry folks.
No, this is their first time actually emceeing the show.
First time emceeing. They're not industry people. A lot of times these award shows, they'll bring in sort of like a local celebrity. I think the GPHG tends to bring in sort of celebrities, known personalities from like the French speaking world. And so they had two MCs who weren't industry folks. So they don't know intimately who's who and what's what and things like that. And to them, this is all a soup of industry executives.
Yeah, it would be like if someone hired me to MC like a medical device.
Yeah, conference. you wouldn't know who was who or what was what. So, and that's not to say these people weren't prepared, it's just to give them the benefit of the doubt. In any event, in a couple of instances, this is even before the Aiguille d'Or, rather than announcing the person who is meant to present or announce the award, so the way this would work is for each category, typically a jury member or two jury members would come to the stage and they would open the envelope and read the winner for the category. And so the MC's role is to introduce that presenter. And in a couple of instances, rather than introducing the presenter, I don't know if their cue cards got mixed up or what, they introduced the award winner. So they called to the stage rather than the presenter, they would call the stage the award winner, which would give away the award winner. But so in the case of like the women's complication, rather than announcing the presenters who were going to read and present the award, they called to the stage the head of a Chopard's jewelry division. And that immediately gave away who won the award. And so this happened a couple of times where they made these slips, but it happened in probably the biggest and the most profound way for the Aiguille d'Or, which is essentially the grand prize.
Traditionally, the winner of the previous year is the one who comes up to announce and present the award to the next or the current year's winner. So they had Christopher Granger Hare, whose phenomenal secular perpetual calendar won last year, come up to announce who would be the winner, which was Breguet for their Souscription chronograph. But there was the awkward moment of having Chris come up and stand beneath a giant Breguet logo.
Well, not even that. Rather than saying, coming to the stage now is Christopher Granger Hare, CEO of IWC, they called to the stage the CEO of Breguet.
Yeah.
And so Christopher Granger Hare walks up there, and everyone knows, of course, Breguet is the winner. And then in addition to that, there was a production flub where not only the presenters messed this up, but then the production folks behind the scene were playing the reel for Breguet. Wow. So typically when the winner is announced, and they then play a reel of the watch to introduce the watch and show some beautiful macros of the watch. So they're playing the Breguet reel while Christopher Granger Hare is giving, his speech to graciously pass the baton to and announce the next year's winner. So it was tense.
To give you an idea, it's a little bit like inviting the Prime Minister of England up while the French national anthem plays. You know?
Fair enough.
It's like, of course they're friends and allies, but so it's one of those. Now, all of that said, that does not in any way diminish the importance of the event, nor does it diminish the communal nature of the event. And it was a reminder of how, in many ways, while this is a competitive multi-billion-dollar industry, we're all in it together. And I know that might sound a little corny, but on a day-to-day basis, we all work together. We all talk to each other. We compete with one another. There's all sorts of things that are happening. But in the end, everybody's doing the same thing. We're all making watches, selling watches, designing watches, marketing watches, keeping this particular art form alive. Some are more commercial than others. Some are more artistic than others. You have a room with everyone from, Max Booster, Fiona Kruger, newcomers, students, all the way up
people who've been in the industry for decades, and this is their first time attending the GPHG.
Exactly,
How cool is that?
All the way up to CEOs of the biggest companies that are in that room. And everyone's, there's no boxes. No one's separated. Everyone's in the same room. And I don't know. I found the whole experience to be very moving. And it really struck me. It really affected me.
Well, I feel terrible for Breguet, and not to harp on the flub, but the thing that everyone was, of course, talking about after the show. So you go there, you walk through this maze, you sit down, you sit through the show. Then after the show, there's a little bit of a cocktail hour. There's even a sort of a formal dinner hosted by the GPHG. Each brand sort of sponsors a table for that and invites guests. But the thing everyone was talking about at the cocktail hour were the flubs, and the biggest one of all, which was the Breguet flub. And so I feel terrible for Breguet, because what people are going to remember about that event and about the Aiguille d'Or is the flub. And I think there is so much to talk about with, we haven't talked about many of the watches at all, really, but there's so much to talk about with Breguet winning the Aiguille d'Or with the Souscription watch that I think is rather, in some ways, kind of shocking, really remarkable, important for Breguet.
And just what that watch means and is hearkening back to as it relates to the modern watch industry.
And what the selection of that watch is sort of best in show says about, I think, the watches that the jury was awarding overall that night. There's a lot in there. And the kudos that Breguet deserves is sort of overshadowed by these flubs, which I think is unfortunate, but that is the thing that everyone in the industry is talking about. And apparently the similar issues happened the year before where winners were announced prematurely by a different presenter. So, I really hope, look, the GPHG in the execution of this event gets so much right and deserves so much credit for doing this. They were celebrating 25 years of this show. It's a remarkable achievement. It's a remarkable show. It's a gift to the industry and to the watch community that they even do this. We can debate whether we think, award shows matter or the validity of them, or talk about the brands that are conspicuously absent by not presenting, but it's a remarkable thing they do. It's a remarkable accomplishment for Breguet, and it's just too bad that it was overshadowed by a mistake.
Yeah, but Lord knows I've gone up on my lines on stage, so things happen. And
I just hope they're able to figure out how to make the system for announcing people to the stage a little bit more foolproof.
Yeah. All of that to say, and I think we can end with this. A heartfelt moment just from me. The only reason that I get to be here, the only reason, not just, can fly here and do this, but am a member of the Academy, is because of everyone who is listening to this podcast, every client that has supported us, every individual that has ever bought a watch from us. And I really felt that last night, and it means a lot to me because this is an art form and a business that I care about to my core. And I am extraordinarily grateful to the clients and friends and partners and supporters who have helped us build this and be in one of those seats last night, being part of a business that I adore. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Truly, if you told either of us 10 years ago that November of 2025, we would forget about being an Academy member, that we just get to attend the GPHG ceremony, it would be unthinkable. It truly is a bucket list thing for us. This is up there with very few moments we've had doing this. I remember when we walked into the Hodinkee offices back in 2019 to record an episode of Hodinkee Radio. I mean, the feeling of this is on that level. It's a defining moment in our career just to be able to sit in that room and be part of it. We used to say this every time we would launch a collaborative watch and would send an email about the collaborative watch. But the sentiment is certainly true in this instance, which is this is a dream come true for us. And you guys are the ones who make that possible with your support. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We appreciate it. And of course, thank you for listening. Open Work is a production of Collective Horology. You can find us online at collectivehorology.com. And please get in touch with your questions, your feedback, your suggestions. We love those. It's podcast@collectivehorology.com.